Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Marriage Facade. Daryl Thompson stood in his garage workshop, methodically organizing his tools with the precision that had once made him invaluable to military intelligence operations. At 42, he maintained the lean build and sharp eyes of his Army days, though most people saw only a quiet man who fixed vintage motorcycles and kept to himself. His neighbors in the upscale Riverside Hills subdivision knew him as Lori's devoted husband, the guy who always had the perfect lawn and never missed their anniversary dinner reservations. What they didn't know was that Daryl had been documenting every detail of his wife's affair for the past 8 months. The marriage had started promisingly 12 years ago. Lori Patel had been an ambitious marketing coordinator at a tech firm, drawn to Daryl's mysterious past and quiet confidence. He just transitioned out of the military, using his GI benefits to start a private security consulting business. She'd loved the idea of marrying someone with such an interesting background, especially when his work began bringing in serious money. But Lori's definition of love had always been conditional on what Daryl could provide. The house in Riverside Hills, the luxury cars, the designer clothes. These weren't expressions of their partnership, but trophies in her personal collection. When Daryl's business hit a rough patch 2 years ago, Lori's affection had evaporated like morning dew. Daryl had first noticed the changes in small ways. Lori spending more time at work functions that he was never invited to. Her phone constantly buzzing with messages she'd quickly hide. The way she'd started criticizing everything about him, his clothes, his hobbies, even his laugh. But the final confirmation had come 6 months ago when he'd installed a discreet tracking device on her car during one of his business trips. Travis Dudley had entered their lives like a tornado, all flash and swagger. 10 years younger than Daryl, Travis owned 3 car dealerships and believed his money made him untouchable. He drove flashy cars, wore gold chains, and had the kind of artificial charm that impressed people who valued style over substance. More importantly, he was exactly the kind of man who would underestimate Daryl Thompson completely. That evening, Daryl sat in his study reviewing the files he'd compiled. Photographs of Lori and Travis at expensive restaurants, hotel receipts, credit card statements showing purchases that didn't match her supposed whereabouts. But the most interesting file was the one labeled T. Dudley background check. Travis wasn't just a successful businessman. He was also a man with carefully hidden secrets that would make excellent leverage when the time came. Lori appeared in the doorway, already dressed for another girl's night out. She wore a red dress Daryl had never seen before and perfume that wasn't her usual scent. "Don't wait up," she said without looking at him. "We might be out late." "Have fun," Daryl replied, not glancing up from his papers. "I'll probably be working on the Morrison security proposal anyway." She hesitated, perhaps sensing something different in his tone, but then shrugged and left. Daryl listened to her heels clicking across the hardwood floor, then the garage door opening and closing. Only then did he allow himself a small smile. Tomorrow, he would begin implementing the plan he'd been developing for months, a plan that would give Lori and Travis exactly what they thought they wanted, while ensuring they got far more than they bargained for. Chapter 2. The Ultimatum. The divorce papers arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who seemed genuinely apologetic. Daryl accepted them with the same calm demeanor he'd maintained through countless military briefings where lives hung in the balance. He read through them carefully at his kitchen table, noting the aggressive terms Lori's lawyer had outlined. She wanted the house, half his business assets, and spousal support that would essentially fund her new lifestyle with Travis. When Lori returned that evening, she found Daryl grilling steaks on the back patio as if nothing had happened. The divorce papers sat neatly stacked on the kitchen counter. "You got them," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of defiance and nervousness. "I did." Daryl flipped a steak with practiced precision. "Interesting reading." Lori's jaw tightened. She'd clearly expected anger, pleading, or at least some emotional reaction. Daryl's composure unsettled her, just as he'd intended. "I want you to understand something, Daryl. This isn't a negotiation. I've been talking to Travis, and we've made our decision. You have 48 hours to get your things out of this house. My new boyfriend owns this place now, and I won't have you making him uncomfortable." Daryl continued cooking, his movements steady and methodical. "Travis owns the house now? That's interesting. When did we complete that transaction?" "Don't be smart with me." Lori's voice rose. "I know what I'm entitled to." My lawyer explained everything. "Travis said he'll buy out your half at fair market value, which is more generous than you deserve after." "After what, Lori?" Daryl turned to face her, his gray eyes calm but penetrating. "After working 80-hour weeks to build a business that could afford this lifestyle? After 12 years of marriage where I never once questioned where you were or what you were doing?" For a moment, Lori looked genuinely uncomfortable. Then Travis's voice boomed from the front door. "Babe, you in here? I brought Chinese." Travis Dudley strutted into the backyard wearing a silk shirt, unbuttoned, one button, too many, and designer jeans that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. At 32, he had the kind of artificially perfect appearance that came from expensive dental work, professional tanning, and a personal trainer. His hair was slicked back with too much gel, and he wore a Rolex that caught the patio light with every gesture. Well, Travis grinned, revealing teeth so white they were almost luminescent. "If it isn't the soon-to-be ex-husband. Lori told me you might need some convincing to do the right thing here." Daryl shut off the grill and faced Travis directly. "And what exactly would the right thing be?" Travis spread his arms wide, gesturing at the house and property. "Look around you, buddy. This is way too much house for a guy like you anyway. Lori deserves to live somewhere that matches her quality, you know what I mean? I'm prepared to make you a very fair offer for your half. Cash on the table. Everyone wins." "A guy like me," Daryl repeated thoughtfully. "What kind of guy would that be, Travis? Come on, man. No offense, but you're what, 40-something? Drives a 10-year-old pickup truck, works out of his garage. Lori needs someone who can provide for her properly. Someone with ambition, with resources." Travis pulled out a thick envelope from his jacket. 50,000 cash. That's more than generous for half of whatever equity you've got in this place. Lori watched nervously as Daryl examined the envelope without touching it. She'd expected him to either explode in anger or crumble under Travis's aggressive confidence. Instead, her husband just smiled. The same quiet smile she'd seen him wear during their early dating days when someone had tried to cheat him at poker. "You know what, Travis? You're absolutely right. This house is too much for a guy like me." Daryl walked over to the patio table and sat down, gesturing for them to join him. "I accept your offer. All of it. The house, the buyout, the timeline. 48 hours to clear out." Travis and Lori exchanged confused glances. This was going too smoothly. "Just like that?" Travis asked suspiciously. "Just like that," Daryl confirmed. "But I do have one small request. Since this is happening so quickly, I'd like to spend the next 2 days properly cataloging my personal belongings. Some of them have sentimental value, and I want to make sure nothing important gets left behind. I hope you'll both respect that." "Of course," Lori said quickly, relief evident in her voice. "That's completely reasonable." Travis nodded, though he was still watching Daryl with barely concealed suspicion. "Yeah, sure. Just make sure you're gone by Thursday night. I'll be moving my stuff in Friday morning." "Perfect." Daryl stood and extended his hand to Travis. "Welcome to the neighborhood." As Travis gripped his hand, Daryl squeezed just hard enough to remind the younger man that despite his quiet demeanor, he was still a soldier who had spent years preparing for battles where the stakes were life and death. Travis's confident smile flickered for just an instant before returning full force. "Pleasure doing business with you, pal." Chapter 3. The Calm Before the Storm. For the next 48 hours, Daryl became a ghost in his own home. He moved through the house with quiet efficiency, packing boxes with military precision while Lori and Travis celebrated their victory with increasingly loud dinner parties and overnight stays. They made no effort to hide their relationship anymore, and Travis's booming laughter often echoed through the halls late into the night. What they didn't notice was how methodically Daryl was working. He wasn't just packing his belongings. He was installing, adjusting, and activating systems that had been dormant in the house for months. The security consultation business had given him access to cutting-edge surveillance equipment, and the house that Travis was so eager to own had become a sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation. On Wednesday evening, Daryl's old Army buddy Marcus Clark stopped by with a moving truck. Marcus was built like a linebacker and had the kind of presence that made people step aside without knowing why. He'd followed Daryl from military intelligence into private security, and their company specialized in what they diplomatically called complex problem resolution. "You sure about this plan, D?" Marcus asked as they loaded furniture into the truck. "Seems like a lot of effort for a cheating wife and her sugar daddy." "It's not about Lori anymore," Daryl replied, securing a box labeled workshop tools that was suspiciously heavy. "She made her choice. But Travis made this personal when he waltzed into my house talking about guys like me and thinking his money made him untouchable." Marcus grinned. "The old Daryl Thompson is coming out to play. I haven't seen that look in your eyes since Afghanistan. Different kind of war, same principles. Know your enemy, control the battlefield, and always have an exit strategy." Through the window, they could see Lori and Travis in the kitchen, drinking wine and laughing as they planned their new life together. Travis had his arm around Lori's waist, his other hand gesturing dramatically as he told some story that clearly cast him as the hero. "You run that background check on Loverboy?" Marcus asked. "Thoroughly. Travis Dudley isn't nearly as clean as he pretends to be. 3-car dealerships, but only 2 are profitable. The third is bleeding money because he's been using it to launder cash for his brother-in-law's gambling operation. His books are cooked, his taxes are questionable, and he owes the wrong kind of people more money than he can afford to pay back. Dangerous people? The kind who break kneecaps first and ask questions later. Travis has been staying ahead of his debts by constantly expanding, borrowing against future earnings. But it's a house of cards, and all it needs is the right push to come tumbling down." As they finished loading the truck, Daryl's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Package delivered. Installation complete. System active." He deleted the message and pocketed the phone. Thursday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth. Daryl stood in the now-empty garage, making a final inspection of his workshop. To casual observation, it looked like any other residential garage. Oil stains on the floor, empty shelf along the walls, basic electrical outlets. But Daryl's eyes picked out the nearly invisible cameras, the modified electrical panels, and the carefully concealed network equipment that would give him complete surveillance access to the house. Travis arrived at 6 p.m. sharp, clearly eager to assert his dominance over his new territory. He wore a custom suit and drove his newest acquisition, a bright red Maserati that he parked prominently in the driveway. "Time's up, pal," Travis announced, striding into the garage like he owned it, which legally he now did. "I hope you found everything you were looking for." "I did," Daryl replied. "Thank you for being so accommodating." Lori appeared beside Travis, carrying a bottle of champagne. "I wanted to thank you for making this so easy, Daryl. I know it couldn't have been simple for you." "It really wasn't as complicated as I thought it would be," Daryl said truthfully. He handed Travis a set of keys and a folder containing the deed transfer paperwork. "Everything you need is in there. The house is yours." Travis took the folder but kept watching Daryl suspiciously. "You're taking this awfully well for a guy who just lost his house and his wife." Daryl shouldered his final duffel bag and walked toward his pickup truck. "Sometimes you have to lose a battle to win the war, Travis. Enjoy the house. I have a feeling you're going to get everything you deserve out of it." As Daryl drove away, he could see Travis and Lori in his rearview mirror, standing in the driveway and watching him leave. Tomorrow, Travis would move into the house that he thought he'd won through money and intimidation. But Daryl Thompson hadn't survived 15 years of military intelligence by making emotional decisions or surrendering battlefield advantages. The real war was about to begin. Chapter 4. New Ownership. Travis Dudley moved into the Riverside Hills house like a conquering general claiming enemy territory. By Friday afternoon, a parade of delivery trucks had brought Italian leather furniture, a 75-inch television, and what appeared to be half of a high-end electronics store. He strutted through the rooms with Lori on his arm. pointing out all the improvements he planned to make now that someone with taste was in charge. "First thing we're doing is ripping out that pathetic workshop," Travis declared, gesturing toward the garage. "I'm putting in a proper man cave. Pool table, wet bar, maybe even a hot tub. Show this neighborhood what real money looks like." Lori nodded enthusiastically, though she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Daryl's calm acceptance of everything had been too easy. She'd lived with him for 12 years and had never seen him give up on anything without a fight. But Travis's confidence was infectious, and she pushed her doubts aside. That first night, they celebrated with expensive wine and dinner catered from the city's most exclusive restaurant. Travis regaled Lori with stories of his business conquests, his voice growing louder and more boastful with each glass of wine. By midnight, they were sprawled across the new couch, Travis's arm possessively draped around Lori as he flipped through premium cable channels. "This is just the beginning, babe," he slurred slightly. "Wait until you see what I've got planned for us. New car for you, vacation home in Miami, maybe even a boat. Sky's the limit when you're with Travis Dudley." What Travis didn't notice were the nearly invisible cameras documenting his every word and action. Daryl had spent months installing surveillance equipment throughout the house, disguised as everyday fixtures. The smoke detectors, electrical outlets, even the thermostat housing contained high-definition cameras and audio recording equipment. Every room was monitored, every conversation recorded, every moment of Travis and Lori's new life captured in crystal-clear detail. 2 miles away, in a modest apartment that served as his temporary base of operations, Daryl sat before an array of monitors displaying feeds from throughout the house. He sipped coffee and watched Travis stumble drunkenly toward the master bedroom, pausing occasionally to make notes in a leather-bound journal. Saturday morning brought Travis's first real surprise. He woke to find 3 men in expensive suits standing in his kitchen, drinking coffee and reading newspapers as if they owned the place. "What the hell?" Travis shouted, grabbing a baseball bat from the hallway closet. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" The largest of the 3 men, a silver-haired gentleman with hands like sledgehammers, looked up from his newspaper with mild interest. "Mr. Dudley, we've been waiting for you to wake up. I'm Vincent Marconi. These are my associates, Mr. Ricci and Mr. Catalano." Travis's blood ran cold. He recognized the names from his brother-in-law's increasingly frantic phone calls. Vincent Marconi was the kind of man who collected debts with compound interest and never had to raise his voice to be intimidating. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is my house," Travis said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "I'll call the police." "Your house?" Vincent raised an eyebrow. "That's interesting, because according to our records, you still owe us $350,000 from your various business ventures, money that was supposed to be paid last month. I told Tommy I need more time. The car lot deal fell through, but I've got other—" "Mr. Dudley," Vincent interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made Travis's protest die in his throat. "We're not here to discuss your excuses. We're here because this house represents collateral for your debt. A very valuable piece of collateral that we've decided to inspect." Lori appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a silk robe. "Travis? What's going on? Who are these men?" "Go back upstairs," Travis hissed, but it was too late. Vincent's associates were already moving through the house, examining the expensive new furniture and electronics with the practiced eyes of professional appraisers. "Nice place," Vincent commented, walking through the living room and running his fingers along the Italian leather sofa. "Very nice indeed. This should cover about 10% of what you owe us, assuming everything is as valuable as it appears." "You can't just take my stuff," Travis protested. "I have rights." Vincent's laugh was dry and humorless. "Rights? Mr. Dudley, you forfeited your rights when you used our money to buy merchandise you couldn't sell and then lied about your ability to repay us. However, I'm not an unreasonable man. I'll give you 1 week to come up with the full amount you owe. If you can't, we'll be back to collect everything of value in this house." As quickly as they had appeared, the 3 men left, leaving Travis and Lori standing in their expensive living room, feeling like the walls were closing in. Travis grabbed his phone and frantically began making calls, try to find anyone who might loan him enough money to satisfy Vincent Marconi's demands. From his apartment, Daryl watched the entire encounter with deep satisfaction. The surveillance system he'd installed included audio pickups sensitive enough to record whispered conversations, and every word of Travis's predicament was being digitally archived. But this was just the opening move in a much larger game. Chapter 5. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. By Sunday night, Travis Dudley was beginning to understand that his problems extended far beyond simple debt collection. His phone rang constantly with calls from creditors, business partners, and increasingly desperate associates who had suddenly discovered discrepancies in their shared ventures. His brother-in-law Tommy had disappeared entirely, leaving behind only a voicemail warning Travis to fix this mess or we're all dead. What Travis didn't know was that someone had been anonymously forwarding carefully selected information to the right people. Tax records that didn't quite add up, bank deposits that couldn't be easily explained, and business transactions that violated several federal regulations. The information was always accurate, always legally obtained, and always devastating. Daryl Thompson had learned patience during his military years, but he perfected it during his transition to private security consulting. His business specialized in helping corporations protect themselves from industrial espionage, corporate fraud, and executive kidnapping. The skills required for protection were often identical to those needed for attack. It was simply a matter of perspective. Monday morning brought a knock on the door that made Travis's blood pressure spike. 2 federal agents stood on his doorstep, badges visible and expressions grim. "Mr. Dudley?" "Agent Sarah Walsh, IRS Criminal Investigation Division. This is Agent Michael Torres, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. We'd like to ask you some questions about your business operations." Lori watched from the kitchen window as Travis was led away in handcuffs 3 hours later. The federal agents had arrived with a warrant to search the house and had found exactly what they were looking for: financial records that Travis had stupidly stored in his home office, documents that clearly showed money laundering, tax evasion, and fraud spanning back 5 years. What Lori didn't know was that those documents had been planted. Daryl had gained access to the house during the 48-hour transition period and had carefully seeded Travis's home office with photocopies of real financial records obtained through his professional network. The documents were genuine, but they'd been strategically placed to ensure maximum impact during a federal investigation. By Tuesday evening, Travis was out on bail, but facing federal charges that could put him away for 20 years. His car dealerships were under federal seizure orders, his bank accounts frozen, and his passport confiscated. The Maserati had been towed from the driveway, and the expensive furniture was already tagged for asset forfeiture. Lori sat alone in the house that no longer felt like the palace of her dreams. Without Travis's income, she couldn't afford the mortgage payments. Without his bluster and confidence, she was beginning to realize how little she actually knew about the man she'd thrown away her marriage for. That's when she received the phone call. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Detective Jennifer Hayes with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling about some irregularities we've discovered regarding the ownership of your current residence." "What kind of irregularities?" Lori asked, though she was already afraid of the answer. "Well, it appears that the property deed transfer you filed last week contains some questionable elements. Specifically, the financial documentation showing Mr. Dudley's ability to purchase the property appears to have been falsified. If that's the case, the transfer could be considered fraudulent, which would void the sale entirely." Lori's hands began to shake. "What does that mean?" "It means, Mrs. Thompson, that you might not actually own the house you're living in. And if Mr. Dudley used falsified financial documents to obtain the property, both of you could be facing additional criminal charges." After hanging up, Lori sat in the darkening house and finally allowed herself to consider the possibility that had been nagging at her for days. Daryl's calm acceptance of defeat, his willingness to walk away from everything he'd worked for, his strange smile as he'd handed over the keys. None of it made sense unless he'd known something they didn't. She tried calling Travis, but his phone went straight to voicemail. She tried calling her lawyer, but he was suddenly unavailable. As night fell over Riverside Hills, Lori Thompson found herself alone in a house she might not legally own, with a husband facing federal prison time and a bank account that was rapidly approaching zero. Outside in the darkness, a figure sat in a nondescript sedan, watching the house through high-powered binoculars. Daryl Thompson had spent years tracking high-value targets in hostile territory, and suburban surveillance was child's play by comparison. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. Chapter 6. The Walls Close In. Wednesday morning brought a development that made Travis Dudley's nightmare complete. His court-appointed attorney, his expensive private lawyer, had dropped him a moment his retainer check bounced, delivered news that would have broken a lesser man. The federal prosecutor is offering a plea deal, the overworked public defender explained during their brief meeting in the county jail's consultation room. 25 years reduced to 12 if you provide information about your co-conspirators and fully cooperate with a money laundering investigation. 25 years. Travis's voice cracked. For what? Moving some money around? Everybody does that. Mr. Dudley, the charges against you include racketeering, tax evasion, fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. The government has documentation going back 5 years showing systematic criminal activity across multiple business entities. They have bank records, financial statements, recorded conversations. Recorded conversations? Travis interrupted. That's impossible. I never talked to any cops. The attorney consulted his notes. According to the prosecutor, they have surveillance footage and audio recordings from multiple locations, including your home. Apparently, someone's been feeding them information for months. Travis felt the world spinning around him. Someone had been systematically destroying his life, and he was beginning to have a very good idea who that someone might be. Meanwhile, Lori was discovering that her problems extended far beyond the house deed. Her credit cards had been mysteriously canceled. Her joint bank accounts with Travis were frozen as part of the federal investigation, and her own employer was suddenly asking uncomfortable questions about her relationship with a suspected criminal. The final blow came Thursday afternoon when Detective Hayes arrived at the house with a locksmith and an eviction notice. I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson, but the deed transfer has been officially voided. The property reverts to its previous legal owner, which according to county records is... Detective Hayes consulted her paperwork. Daryl Thompson. He's asked us to inform you that you have 24 hours to remove your belongings before the locks are changed. Lori stared at the eviction notice in disbelief. This is impossible. Daryl signed everything over. We have documentation. Yes, ma'am, but that documentation was based on financial records that have been proven fraudulent. Mr. Dudley never actually had the resources to purchase this property, which means the entire transaction was invalid from the beginning. As the detective and locksmith left, Lori finally understood the magnitude of what had happened to her. Daryl hadn't simply walked away from their marriage. He'd orchestrated the complete destruction of everyone who had betrayed him. And he'd done it with the kind of cold precision that reminded her of the man she'd fallen in love with 12 years ago, before she'd forgotten what he was capable of. That evening, as Lori frantically packed her belongings into suitcases and boxes, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Daryl's number. Hello, Lori. His voice was calm, almost conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd been shouting. Daryl, I don't know what you've done, but I haven't done anything, Lori. I've simply allowed Travis and you to experience the natural consequences of your choices. Travis decided to steal my house using money he didn't have, money that belonged to some very dangerous people. You decided to support his plan. I just made sure the right information reached the right people at the right time. This is insane. You can't destroy our lives because you're angry about the divorce. I'm not angry about the divorce, Lori. I'm disappointed that 12 years of marriage meant so little to you that you'd try to steal everything I work for to give it to a criminal. But anger? No, this isn't personal anymore. Then why? Why are you doing this to us? Daryl was quiet for a long moment. Because Travis Dudley walked into my house and told me he was taking everything I'd built because men like me don't deserve what men like him can provide. He made it personal when he decided I was beneath his notice. And you made it personal when you chose to help him. Daryl, please. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Yes, you did. And now you'll have time to think about it. The house will be returned to me tomorrow morning. Your belongings need to be gone by then. Where am I supposed to go? I don't have anywhere. That's not my problem anymore, Lori. You chose Travis Dudley over 12 years of marriage. Now you can figure out the future without either of us. The line went dead, leaving Lori alone in the house that had briefly represented everything she thought she wanted. Tomorrow, she'd be homeless, unemployed, and tied to a man facing federal prison time. And Daryl Thompson, the quiet man she dismissed as weak and unambitious, will be proven once again that in any war, the most dangerous enemy is the one who lets you think you've already won. Chapter 7. The Final Gambit. Friday morning arrived with unseasonable clarity, as if the universe itself wanted a perfect view of justice being served. Daryl Thompson stood in the driveway of his house, watching as Lori loaded the last of her belongings into a rental truck. She moved with the mechanical efficiency of someone in shock, her designer clothes wrinkled and her perfectly styled hair disheveled from a sleepless night. Travis Dudley would not be joining her. His bail had been revoked that morning when federal agents discovered he'd been using false identification documents that had been anonymously mailed to the prosecutor's office along with evidence of Travis's plan to flee the country. He was now sitting in a federal holding facility, awaiting a trial that would likely end with him spending the next 2 decades in prison. As Lori closed the truck's cargo door, she turned to face Daryl for what she knew would be the last time. He stood quietly beside his pickup truck, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that made him look like the man she'd married before ambition had poisoned their relationship. "I want you to know I understand now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What you did to us. How you planned all of this. I didn't do anything to you, Lori. I simply stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own choices. That surveillance equipment in the house. You were recording everything, weren't you? All those months you knew about Travis and me, you were documenting everything." Daryl nodded. Every conversation, every meeting, every financial transaction. Travis's criminal activities, your knowledge of them, the fraudulent documents he used to steal my house. All of it legally obtained and properly archived. You could have just divorced me. You could have taken half of everything and moved on with your life. Yes, I could have. But Travis Dudley made this bigger than a simple divorce when he decided to humiliate me in my own home. When he told me I didn't deserve what I'd worked for because I wasn't rich enough or flashy enough to matter. That's when this became about something more than just a failed marriage. Lori climbed into the rental truck's driver's seat, then looked back at him through the open window. "What happens now? Do you just go back to your old life like none of this ever happened?" "No," Daryl said simply. "Because I'm not the same man who lived in this house with you. The man who trusted you, who believed our marriage meant something, who thought people were basically decent. That man is gone. You and Travis killed him. What you're looking at now is what's left. And what's that? Someone who understands that the world is divided into predators and prey, and the only way to survive is to make sure everyone knows which one you are." Lori started the truck's engine, then hesitated. "Do you hate me?" Daryl considered the question seriously. "No, I don't hate you, Lori. Hate requires emotional investment, and I don't have any emotions left to invest in you. You're just someone I used to know." As the rental truck disappeared down the street, Daryl walked through his house, mentally cataloging the damage and planning the restoration. Most of Travis's expensive furniture would be sold to cover the costs of the legal proceedings and surveillance equipment. The house would be returned to its original state, though it would never feel quite the same. But that was acceptable. Daryl Thompson had learned long ago that some victories came at a price, and some battles changed you in ways you couldn't anticipate. The important thing was to win and to make sure your enemies understood that they'd picked the wrong target. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Bar, 7 p.m. First round's on me." Daryl smiled. The first genuine smile he'd felt in months. It was time to rejoin the world and decide what kind of man he wanted to be now that the war was over. Chapter 8. Consequences and Revelations. 3 months later, Travis Dudley sat in a federal courtroom wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles, listening to a judge sentence him to 15 years in federal prison. The plea deal his attorney had negotiated required Travis to forfeit all his remaining assets, cooperate fully with ongoing investigations into organized crime activities, and serve his time without possibility of parole for the first 8 years. Vincent Marconi and his associates had been arrested 2 weeks earlier, thanks to information provided by an anonymous source who documented their illegal activities with video and audio evidence that federal prosecutors called the most comprehensive surveillance package we've ever received. The source had also provided financial records showing the connection between Travis's car dealerships and the money laundering operation, ensuring that everyone involved in the criminal enterprise would face justice. Lori sat in the courtroom's gallery, watching the man she'd thrown away her marriage for receive his sentence. She looked older, worn down by months of stress and uncertainty. Without Travis's income or the house she'd thought would be hers, she'd been forced to move back in with her elderly parents and take a job as a receptionist at a dental clinic. Her dreams of luxury and status had evaporated like morning mist. As the judge's gavel fell, Travis turned to look at her one last time. His artificially perfect appearance had deteriorated during his months in county lockup. His skin was pale, his hair unswept, his expensive dental work unable to disguise the defeat in his eyes. "This is all his fault," Travis mouthed silently, though they both knew he was wrong. Daryl Thompson hadn't forced Travis to launder money, evade taxes, or defraud federal lending institutions. He'd simply ensured that Travis's crimes received the attention they deserved. Outside the courthouse, Lori found herself face-to-face with Detective Hayes, who'd been instrumental in unraveling the complex web of financial fraud that had brought Travis down. "Mrs. Thompson," Detective Hayes said politely, "I wanted to let you know that the investigation into your involvement in Mr. Dudley's activities has been closed. The prosecutor's office has determined that you were unaware of his criminal behavior and won't be facing charges." "Thank you," Lori said quietly. "However," Detective Hayes continued, "I thought you should know that someone provided us with surveillance footage showing you were present during several conversations where Mr. Dudley discussed his illegal activities. The person who provided that evidence could have destroyed your life if they'd chosen to. Instead, they edited the footage to protect your privacy while still giving us what we needed to prosecute Mr. Dudley." Lori felt a chill run down her spine. Even after everything she'd done to him, Daryl had protected her from facing criminal charges. "Who was your source?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Detective Hayes smiled. "That's classified. But between you and me, I've never worked with anyone who understood surveillance and evidence gathering like this person did. If I had to guess, I'd say they had extensive military or law enforcement training. The kind of person you definitely don't want to make an enemy of." As Detective Hayes walked away, Lori stood on the courthouse steps and finally understood the full scope of what Daryl had done. He could have destroyed her completely, could have sent her to prison alongside Travis, could have ruined her life as thoroughly as she tried to ruin his. Instead, he'd surgically removed the threats to his life, while leaving her with just enough rope to hang herself or pull herself up. It was, she realized, a final act of mercy from a man she'd never truly understood. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 6 months after Travis Dudley began serving his federal sentence, Daryl Thompson stood in his completely renovated workshop, putting the finishing touches on a 1967 Mustang Fastback. The house had been restored to its original condition, but the man who lived in it was fundamentally different from the one who'd been served divorce papers nearly a year earlier. The doorbell rang, interrupting his work. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and opened the front door to find a woman in her 30s with short auburn hair and intelligent green eyes. She wore jeans and a blazer and carried herself with the kind of controlled confidence Daryl recognized in fellow veterans. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Agent Rebecca Martinez, FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit. I was hoping we could talk." Daryl invited her in, offering coffee that she accepted gratefully. They sat in his living room, furnished now with comfortable, practical pieces that reflected his actual taste rather than Lori's status-conscious selections. "I'm here about the Travis Dudley case," Agent Martinez explained, specifically about the anonymous source who provided evidence that led to his conviction and the arrest of several organized crime figures. "I imagine that was quite helpful for your investigation." "Helpful doesn't begin to cover it," The surveillance evidence was so comprehensive and professionally gathered that it saved us months of investigation time and resulted in convictions that might otherwise have been impossible. The source clearly had advanced training in intelligence, gathering, and evidence documentation. Darrell sipped his coffee and waited for her to continue. Here's the thing, Mr. Thompson. We know the source had intimate access to your house and extensive knowledge of Mr. Dudley's activities. We also know that you have the exact skill set required to conduct that kind of surveillance operation. And we know you had compelling personal reasons to want Mr. Dudley prosecuted. That's all very interesting, Darrell said neutrally. Agent Martinez smiled. What's also interesting is that we've been investigating a series of similar cases across the country. Corporate executives who thought they were untouchable suddenly finding themselves facing federal charges based on evidence provided by anonymous sources. Financial criminals who've been operating with impunity being brought down by surveillance operations that were clearly conducted by someone with professional training. I imagine there are a lot of people with that kind of training. Not as many as you'd think, and not many who have both the skills and the motivation to target specific types of criminals. We think someone is out there acting as a kind of freelance justice advocate. Darrell set down his coffee cup and studied Agent Martinez carefully. And if such a person existed, what would the FBI's position be? Well, vigilantism is illegal, of course. But providing evidence of criminal activity to law enforcement is not only legal, it's civic-minded. Especially when that evidence is gathered legally and presented in a way that preserves constitutional protections for everyone involved. Agent Martinez reached into her briefcase and pulled out a business card. If you ever encounter evidence of criminal activity that you think law enforcement should know about, I hope you'll consider reaching out. The FBI is always looking for citizens who are willing to help us keep dangerous people off the streets. After she left, Darrell sat in his workshop and considered the conversation. His private security business had evolved over the past months into something more specialized. He still helped corporations protect themselves from threats, but he'd also begun accepting a different kind of client. People who'd been victimized by criminals who thought they were too smart or too well-connected to face consequences. His phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. Thompson Security. Mr. Thompson? My name is Margaret Foster. I got your number from Marcus Clark. He said you might be able to help me with a problem. What kind of problem, Mrs. Foster? My daughter was killed by a drunk driver 8 months ago. The man who hit her is wealthy, well-connected, and his lawyers got the charges reduced to a misdemeanor. He'll serve 90 days in minimum security and keep his license. I've been told there's nothing more the system can do. Darrell leaned back in his chair, already mentally shifting into operational mode. Tell me about this man, Mrs. Foster. Tell me everything you know about his life, his business, his habits, and then we'll see what justice really looks like. As Margaret Foster began to tell her story, Darrell Thompson smiled the same quiet smile that had once unnerved Travis Dudley. The war for his house and his marriage was over, but the larger war, the one between predators and their prey, would continue as long as there were people who thought their money and status made them untouchable. And Darrell Thompson had discovered that he was very good at proving them wrong. In the months that followed, Travis Dudley would learn that federal prison was far less forgiving than the civilian world he'd dominated through money and intimidation. Lori would eventually rebuild her life, though she never again mistook material wealth for true security. And Darrell Thompson would disappear into a new identity, emerging only when justice needed a helping hand and the system had failed someone who deserved better. Some battles end with surrender. Others end with understanding. But the best ones end with the right people winning, even when victory comes at a price that changes you forever. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.